People love saying that businesses rise and fall because of bold ideas, but they rarely notice that the strongest companies survive because someone quietly spends years building systems nobody else bothers to understand until those systems disappear. My name is Victoria Hale, and for 17 years, I worked as the Chief Compliance Strategist at Apex Meridian Technologies, a global software licensing company based in Denver, Colorado, where I designed the legal and operational framework that protected every international agreement. While executives collected awards for success they never could have achieved without the invisible foundation I built. When I joined Apex Meridian, it occupied a cramped office above an old printing warehouse with unreliable internet, mismatched furniture, and only a handful of employees who believed they were creating the next great technology company despite having almost no resources. The founder, Richard Coleman, trusted my ability more than anyone else's, often placing stacks of contracts on my desk before saying, "Victoria, software can always be rewritten, but if our agreements fail, everything we've built disappears overnight." And I made it my mission to create legal protections strong enough to survive every challenge the future could bring. For years, I stayed far from the spotlight while new executives accepted promotions, investors applauded record-breaking profits, and business magazines praised Apex Meridian's unstoppable growth without realizing that every international contract, licensing agreement, and compliance safeguard passed through my office before a single signature reached a client. I never complained because my satisfaction came from knowing that every successful expansion into Europe, Asia, and South America rested on legal foundations I had carefully designed, believing that quiet excellence would always outlast loud ambition. Everything changed after Richard Coleman unexpectedly retired because of failing health, leaving the company in the hands of his ambitious son-in-law, Logan Mercer, a polished executive with expensive suits, endless confidence, and barely 3 years of real corporate experience before inheriting the corner office. During his first company-wide meeting, Logan spoke for nearly an hour about disruption, artificial intelligence, aggressive expansion, and eliminating outdated thinking, while repeatedly glancing toward senior employees as though decades of experience were obstacles standing between him and his dream of becoming the youngest CEO featured on every business magazine cover. Only a few months later, I warned the executive board that accelerating international licensing without updating several long-standing compliance agreements could expose the company to serious legal disputes across multiple jurisdictions. But Logan interrupted me before I could finish and casually dismissed my concerns as the exaggerated fears of someone unwilling to embrace modern business practices. The room became painfully quiet as several executives lowered their eyes instead of supporting the person who had protected the company for nearly 2 decades. And I simply closed my notebook because experience had taught me that arrogance often destroys itself without needing any assistance. The following week, rumors of cost-cutting spread through headquarters, and although younger employees worried about layoffs, I already knew exactly where management would look first because departments that prevent disasters rarely receive appreciation until those disasters finally arrive. Instead of reacting emotionally, I quietly reviewed old compliance archives, secured copies of my professional records, and organized years of documentation that proved exactly how every major international expansion depended upon systems only I fully understood. 3 days later, Human Resources invited me into a conference room with rehearsed smiles and carefully prepared speeches, where Logan confidently announced that my position had become unnecessary because new software and automated legal review platforms could supposedly replace years of specialized expertise. I listened without interrupting, accepted the termination documents with complete composure, requested copies of my original employment agreement and historical performance records, then walked out of the building carrying nothing except a thin folder and the quiet certainty that they had just made the most expensive decision in company history. That evening, I returned home, unlocked a fireproof cabinet in my study, and carefully examined documents I had preserved throughout my entire career, including original partnership agreements, compliance schedules, and handwritten amendments signed during the company's earliest years. While reviewing those files, I discovered that one overlooked provision tied every international licensing framework to an approval process that depended on documentation I alone had maintained, creating a legal vulnerability that nobody in the current leadership even knew existed because they had never bothered to understand how the system had been built. Instead of contacting the company immediately, I patiently observed as Apex Meridian announced an enormous international partnership worth hundreds of millions of dollars, with Logan proudly appearing on television interviews describing the agreement as the beginning of a revolutionary new era for the business. Watching him celebrate a success resting on an incomplete legal foundation confirmed that he had never reviewed the original compliance architecture, and I realized the consequences of his overconfidence would soon become impossible for anyone to ignore. Rather than threatening lawsuits or speaking publicly, I professionally informed one of the overseas partner's legal representatives that they might wish to verify several historical compliance certifications before completing the transaction, presenting my concerns as a routine administrative observation instead of an accusation. Within hours, the international payment process was frozen, while lawyers from multiple countries demanded immediate clarification, transforming what Logan believed would become the proudest day of his career into the beginning of a corporate crisis that spread across boardrooms faster than any press release could contain. The next morning, I received urgent phone calls, emails, and meeting requests from executives who had ignored my advice for months, suddenly treating me as the only person capable of preventing financial catastrophe after previously insisting I was completely replaceable. I agreed to attend one final meeting, not because I wanted revenge, but because I believed accountability should always accompany authority, especially when leaders gamble with responsibilities they never bothered to understand. Inside the executive boardroom, the confidence that once filled the room had disappeared, replaced by anxious attorneys, worried directors, and Logan himself, whose expensive confidence had been replaced by sleepless eyes and desperate questions about how the situation could still be repaired. I calmly explained the compliance framework they had overlooked, demonstrated the documentation proving the company's exposure, and reminded everyone that institutional knowledge is never outdated when billions of dollars depend upon it. After hours of negotiations, the board acknowledged that terminating the person responsible for maintaining the company's legal foundation had been a serious mistake, and they proposed a comprehensive settlement recognizing my years of service while requesting my professional assistance in resolving the international compliance issues. I accepted only after ensuring every agreement respected my contributions, protected my professional reputation, and guaranteed that future governance procedures would prevent similar mistakes from happening to other experienced employees. Months later, Apex Meridian had stabilized under completely new leadership after the board replaced executives whose reckless decisions had nearly destroyed everything the company had spent decades building. While I quietly established an independent consulting firm dedicated to helping organizations strengthen their compliance systems before small mistakes became enormous crises. For the first time in many years, I worked because I enjoyed solving complex challenges rather than proving my value to people who confused confidence with competence, discovering that true success comes from being respected instead of merely employed. As I watched the sunset from the balcony of my new office overlooking the mountains, I realized that the greatest victory had never been the settlement or the recognition, but the satisfaction of knowing integrity, patience, and preparation ultimately defeated arrogance, shortcuts, and empty promises without sacrificing my principles. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.